We had a recent new client phone call and we were talking with them about Roth conversions and they were super excited about it. And I was excited for them because, hey, who doesn't want to save money and convert dollars over to Roth? They were telling me all about their Excel spreadsheet and how they had this set up and they were going to convert to the 22% bracket. And I celebrated all that they had built out and we looked through it together and made sure that it was all there. They also had accounted for their withdrawals. But then I sometimes call myself the pessimistic planner because I start to poke holes in things and find all the problems. And man, I'm sorry for that. But with that, I want to make sure that you're doing the right things with your dough. We don't want to make you do the wrong things. And so I want to give you some different points that we were looking through with this client to make sure that they were doing the right things for their dollars and you're going to be doing the same. And so I'm looking at this plan and what they had built out or this Excel spreadsheet, and I started asking questions. And really, one of the first ones I asked was why? Why 22% for the bracket? And their ultimate answer for that wasn't anything more than just, hey, we were in the 12% bracket. We thought the next bracket up would be the most beneficial to convert to. We didn't want to go too high and go in the 24, 32 or higher. And so that was their idea there. So I was like, okay, that makes sense. Then we started looking at other things such as the withdrawal strategy. And the withdrawal strategy did not outline where the dollars were going to come from. And so when it comes to your withdrawals, something you have to think through is where you're going to pull your dollars from first, because there could be a tax advantage to pulling from different areas first, such as a brokerage account, then a pre-tax account, then the Roth account. Now, that's not always the case, and maybe you don't have a brokerage account to pull from, and that couldn't work for you. But that's something that we like to model out and look through with the plan to make sure that we're accounting for that. From there, with that withdrawal strategy, another step that they were not taking into consideration was required minimum distributions. Those are going to happen for everybody at some point if you have any pre-tax dollars. Oftentimes people forget about it, or they are doing conversions and they have not done enough, and still the required minimum distributions are potentially going to push them in a much higher tax bracket later on down the road, which can affect so many other things that we'll talk through. So during this early time though, with the conversions, something that they were not considering was affordable care. They were going to look to do that, and there are plenty of tax credits that are out there if you can keep your income low. In their scenario specifically, they had a brokerage account that we were potentially able to use and do tax loss harvesting with, or just use what they had and start pulling some of the dollars and maybe not have as much of a high tax bracket, instead look at long-term capital gains, keeping their income low, allowing them to potentially get the ACA tax credits or do the conversions or a combination of both. When you're doing this though, I always talk to clients and I say two different things. I say, don't not live just so that you can get a benefit. Now, granted, I want to make sure you're doing the best for your dollars, but when it comes to that, some people just really don't want to pay the government anything whatsoever, and they're like, I'm not going to live. But eventually that comes to bite you, because if you're not doing the conversions so that you can get the ACA tax credit, well, guess what? Maybe the RMDs are going to be higher later and you're going to pay the government. The piper's always going to call at some point. Is that what they say? The piper calls? Not sure on that. All right. So you've got to make sure you're focusing on those as well. From there, we've got to think through Medicare brackets. So when it comes to that, you have something called IRMAA. IRMAA is going to come into play once you hit 65, once you're taking Medicare, and they're going to start saying, well, what is your income? If you have a really high income or you're doing a lot of conversions where it's pushing you over the certain brackets, you're actually going to pay additional costs for Medicare, which could be an additional expense that may or may not make Roth conversions even worth it. From there, they didn't have anything listed, which wasn't on an Excel spreadsheet, obviously, but it's something that we have to think through, and is that's where are you going? What do you plan to do? A lot of people plan to come down here and hang out with us in Florida where we're living, and they love to retire here. No state income tax. So that's part of the reason for that. But what if you're going to a place that has a higher state income tax? Maybe you're going from Florida to, let's just say, New York. And if that's the case, you kind of flip the script here and you go the opposite direction of what a lot of people do. And now you have to factor that into the game plan, because state income tax is also going to be a big part of this when it comes to Roth conversions. One that oftentimes people don't really think about, and it's kind of morbid to think about, and maybe you don't want to think about, but you do have to factor in potential inheritance. Hopefully you've had some conversations if you're at this point in life where maybe your mom and dad are still living, but they're getting up in age, and you can say, hey, mom and dad, I don't want to have these awkward conversations, though I want to make sure that we're just taking care of you. You're always taken care of, but then we're wanting to make sure that we're accounting for our side of things as well, because sure, I'd love to, get an inheritance of $1 million just laying in my lap. But if you haven't properly planned for that, that could throw a wrench in the game plan a little bit. I guess, in that scenario, you could say, poor you. You're going to have to pay more taxes, but you just got $1 million. So that's all something that you do want to think through. From there, we have to look at all of the different variable scenarios because a lot of people are so focused on, well, I want to do conversions. And the question is why? Why do you want to do conversions? Well, sure, for a lot of people, it's just, I want to make sure that I'm not giving the government as much money. And if that's the case, perfect. This needs to be mapped out in a plan to make sure that the ending dollars or the dollars that you're working with throughout the plan are going to be more if you did the conversions instead of if you didn't do the conversions. Sometimes I see that people will pay less taxes over time by doing a significant amount of conversions. So they're like, sure, well, I just stuck it to the government. But what ends up happening is because they did so much in conversions, they actually shoot themselves in the foot because in the end, they're going to end up with less dollars. Because let's just say that you have $1 million IRA account and you go to convert the $1 million IRA account and you do it all at once. And let's just say that you have, for hypothetical reasons, a 30% tax bracket on that. Well, now you have $700,000 because 30% just went to the government. How long is it going to take $700,000 to continue to grow to bypass the $1 million that you just previously had? Now, sure, I get that it's all tax-free, but what if your bracket, if you didn't do those conversions and you just went slowly along, was only 15%? Well, technically, then you have $850,000 instead of $700,000. So it's just some things that you want to think through there. So that's one of the reasons why you may want to do a conversion is pay less to the government. Second reason why we see a lot of clients do the conversions is solely for the focus of, hey, I want to make sure I take care of my spouse. There's something called the widow tax torpedo. What ends up happening is if you were to pass away and you were married and you have a large lump sum of IRA dollars over here, well, guess what? The RMDs are still going to come due, but now the widow is going to be in a single filing tax bracket. The single filing tax bracket is not as good for people when it comes to filing taxes. Married filing jointly is much more favorable when it comes to the tax system. And so that's something that you want to focus on because, again, you're going to end up giving the government a lot more dollars in that scenario if it were to happen. So we do things, again, pessimistic planner over here, as the what if. What if this happens? What would this look like? And then a lot of people also want to look at, hey, I want to leave my kids dollars. Well, potentially your kids are, doing very well for themselves. And if they are, that's amazing. Maybe they're doctors or surgeons and they're making millions of dollars and they're in a 37% bracket. And you don't want to leave them any dollars that are not going to be converted because it's going to get taxed so high. On the flip side of that, though, potentially your kids are in the 12% bracket. And maybe it makes sense to just leave them the dollars pre-tax. They'll only pay 12% on those dollars, potentially. It depends on how much of a nest egg you're leaving them. But that's all stuff that you're going to want to factor in. So there's a lot of different things you want to look at. There's a lot of pitfalls when it comes to Roth conversions. Sometimes they work for people, sometimes they don't. But don't focus on the one-size-fits-all approach. Instead, start asking these questions to make sure you're doing the right things with your dough.